Hi, it's Will with Grand Duke Dmitri 1921 Diary Series. We're up to the 18th of March, so we're making progress, working our way back to the 31st of March. And what do we have for a recap today? Well, Dmitri, the day before, on the 18th, sorry, the dog distracted me, on the 17th, had received a couple of fellows who wanted to talk to him about a railroad project that they were trying to get going to connect, what was it, the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, and he thought it very interesting and thought that it could be important, but yeah, what was he supposed to do about it? And he had tea with cocoa in Versailles. And then spent the evening and late into the night, apparently, with an old flame of his, Sybil Frisbee, who was there from London. Okay, so yeah, it was an eventful day for him. And as for today, our cast of characters, in addition to including the usual Maria and Coco, we also have two men called Gurevich and Bubnov. I always want to call him Bubala instead of Bubnov, but I suppose it's a completely normal Russian name. I think there was a painter by the name of the same name, Alexander Bubnov. Anyway, yeah, let's see. So Gurevich we've met, and Bubnov not. And let's go ahead and dive in. So this is the 18th March, 1921. It's a Friday in Paris, and Dmitri is receiving his guests at his flat at 76 Rue Miromesnil. So here we go. Gurevich and Bubnov came to see me in the morning. I mean the same Bubnov who was with the naval staff at headquarters in Baranovichi and then in Mogilyov. He hasn't changed at all. He's the same energetic and intelligent fellow. I've always loved him. Both of them came to see me about a very interesting matter. Bubnov wants to establish a military political group on the basis of what exists now in Hungary and Germany, and which would, of course, play a huge role in Russia's future. I'll probably have to discuss this party many more times, but for the moment, it only exists in Bubnov's head. I had lunch at Maria's, then went to Coco's. She and I went back to Versailles, and it was wonderful there. We strolled and breathed the fresh air. I dined at Maria's that evening, then went to the Travelers, where I played a little baccarat. Surprisingly, I actually won a little. I went to bed late. Okay, so I would say there's a certain amount of sarcasm in what Dmitri has to say in this particular diary entry. He had a reputation for being sarcastic to the point that it really rubbed people the wrong way. But it's not always easy for me, even though I'm quite used to his way of expressing himself. It's not always easy for me to tell when he's being sarcastic. Sometimes it's very subtle. So I'll leave that up to you to decide in this instance. So we start out with General Arseny Anatolyevich Gurevich, who was in his 40s and who had kind of was one of these military men, these generals who more or less attached himself to Dmitri in Paris. And he'd had really an amazing career, considering at this time in 1921 he was already in his 40s, only in his 40s. He'd done quite a lot. He'd been a professor at the General Staff Academy. He'd been a corps commander during the First World War, and in the emigration in Paris, he taught military courses, I'm not sure where, and he was active in various emigre military organizations, and there were a lot of them. Dmitri belonged to at least one. He would be very active later in the association, the Horse Guards Regimental Association, and every every guards regiment, I don't know about every regiment in general, had its club, its association, and there were naval clubs and, both naval army clubs, and they were all over the place, and they were something that the men in the emigration who had military careers were very, very keen on. They could get together, they could relive the days gone by when they were having a great time in the mess, in parades and that sort of thing, all of course before the outbreak of the First World War. But I suppose there were many of them who were actually had been traumatized by the war and by the Civil War, and it was good for them to get together with other people who had been through the same things. Anyway, enough about that. That was what Gulevich was up to in emigration, and he's not my favorite person, because he welcomed the German invasion of Russia in 1941, which if Dmitri found out about, he would have been absolutely horrified. But at this point anyway, Gulevich was one of those who were in Paris, not in Germany. And yeah, he more or less attached himself to Dmitri, as I said. The second one, another man of high rank and absolutely impressive military credentials. Admiral Alexander Dmitrievich Bubnov. He was even younger. He was not even 40 yet, and yet he was internationally recognized as a brilliant naval strategist. He'd been decorated not only by his own country, Russia, of course, but by Britain, by Japan, by Romania, by Yugoslavia, by France, had been or would be decorated. And he would be in 1923, upon the request of the king, would go to Yugoslavia to found and form a Yugoslavian navy. And he was offered a chance to come to the U.S., and he was offered a full professorship at Annapolis at the U.S. Naval Academy. But he turned that down, and I believe there's some quote where he said that if he was ever going to have a chance to go back to Russia, it would be he'd be closer in Yugoslavia than he would be in the U.S., which of course was quite true. He was not a Nazi supporter, to the best of my knowledge. At least the Nazis, well, what was he? He was in his sixth, he wasn't that old during the Second World War, and he was, I think he was forced to leave his post in the Yugoslav Navy once the Germans came in. So it doesn't seem like he was. Not only was he not a Nazi supporter, but he was not a German supporter. But here he is wanting to form a military organization. So he was living in Paris at this time, and I guess he wanted to form, Dmitri calls it a military political group, that would be on the same basis, or would be modeled on the military political group that existed, emigre group that existed in Hungary and Germany. And so, Dmitri, here's where he has to be speaking sarcastically when he says that that of course it would play a huge role, this organization, of course, would, of course, play a huge role in Russia's future. Well, we know how Dmitri feels about the role of emigres in Russia's future, meaning, he didn't think that emigres were going to play a big part in Russia's future. So that's obvious sarcasm. And then when he talks about kind of exasperated, I'm sure I'm going to have to discuss this and hear much more about this. And he seems kind of, this isn't what he wanted to do anymore, right? The day before, he'd been approached by these businessmen, and now he's being approached by, with this military political project, and he's burned out on all this at the moment after his trip to Berlin, right? So anyway, as I say, you can judge for yourself how sarcastic he's being in his pronunciations on this, his pronouncements, I should say, not pronunciations. I always wondered if he had even a slight accent in Russian. He would certainly have had one in English, but because he was raised in a household that spoke more than one language, I wonder if he had a little bit of an accent in all the languages he spoke. But I guess unless some recordings come to light, I will never know. Okay, anyway, I'm digressing a lot today. So it's interesting that Dmitri had known him at both of the general headquarters in Russia. So at first, the Russian headquarters were in Baranovichi, and then they moved to Mogilyov, which I believe was in Belarus, but I'm not sure. I should have looked that up. So Baranovichi was Nikolai Nikolaevich's headquarters, and Mogilyov was the Tsar's. When the Tsar took over, the headquarters were moved to Mogilyov. I don't know if that was because of the changing front, or if that was Nicholas's preference, probably the former. But Dmitri had a chance to be at headquarters, at both of those headquarters, and especially at Mogilyov, and apparently he met Bubnov there and just liked him so much. I mean, he says, I've always loved this guy. How does he put it? He didn't say guy. He's the same energetic and intelligent fellow. I've always loved him. So Dmitri liked smart people. He was a smart person, and he liked smart people, and it impresses me that he was able to attract people like Gudevich, who was, being a professor at the General Staff Academy, you were a smart person, and Bubnov as well. Okay, so where do we go from there? Yeah, okay. Coco. Off they go to Versailles again. And Dmitri's so happy. It's wonderful. They're strolling together. They're breathing in the fresh air. He's there with his girl. Yeah. So great, and I wonder if Versailles was kind of their place, at least prior to this trip to the south of France. I wonder if they went back there when they returned, if they would go and stroll in Versailles when they returned from the south of France. I don't know. Anyway, very romantic, but apparently Coco is quite busy. And I get the impression that Dmitri would have liked to have been basically spending all his time with her, but that she had other things to do. So he goes back to his sister for dinner, and then being at loose ends, he goes to the Travelers, and there he's treading on very thin ice because he has a gambling problem. Most of his debt, beginning back when he was in Tehran after the revolution, almost all of his debt and his financial, at times catastrophic financial situation came precisely from playing baccarat. That was his game, specifically, usually chemin de fer, but here he just says baccarat. And he actually expresses surprise that he won a little, because he tended not to do so well at it. And yeah, when he's sort of at loose ends, this is something that he might do. So maybe it was a good thing that the night before, when he was at the Travelers, he met up with Sybil Frisbee and ended up amusing himself in another way than gambling. Baccarat was definitely Dmitri's kryptonite. And it kind of surprises me when he says, surprisingly, I actually won a little, because he had, everything that he found appealing about New Thought philosophy was that you can more or less take charge of your life simply through positive thinking, and that if you ever stop thinking positively, things are going to turn disastrous. I mean, the book that he had read in Persia, In Tune with the Infinite by Ralph Waldo Trine, even blamed when people had diseases. Trine basically blames it on them and says, well, they've let too much negativity into their lives, so they've brought it upon themselves. And, you know, Dmitri was for a while quite into this. And it was hard for him to try to push those negative thoughts away. But apparently he has lapsed a little bit from his New Thought beliefs, because now, for instance, he's saying that he's surprised that he won a little, whereas, you know, back in Persia, he would have said, you know, he would have had this mantra about, if I play, I'll win. But of course, anyway, this is all speculation on my part, and I just find it interesting. So forgive me for yammering on about that a little bit. Okay, what do we have next time? Well, we've had this brief period of 2 days between when Coco and he go out to the car dealership and buy the rolls and when they actually are going to hit the road, so to speak. So Coco, I now can confirm, had not picked up the car yet. But the next day she would be picking it up. And of course she wanted to try it out. So she and Dmitri would be making an overnight road trip to Normandy in the Rolls. So that is quite an interesting diary entry. So now we're really going to start on their time together. This is a little prelude before they go off on the 22nd. So tomorrow it will be his diary entry of the 18th, and then they'll leave for the south of France on the 22nd. Anyway, I hope to see you next time. Bye.